The most desired being in the galaxy. The auction hall was filled with the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Warlords, kings, and diplomats from 100 different species had gathered for one purpose. They were not here for war, trade, or politics. They were here for her. Velzira stood in the center of the grand chamber, tall and graceful, her silver-blue skin shimmering under the golden lights. Her long, flowing hair seemed to shift between colors, like the waves of a distant ocean. Her violet eyes glowed faintly, filled with knowledge and mystery. She was not just beautiful, she was legendary. An Eldari of purest blood, she was considered the most perfect being in existence. Her mind was sharp, her telepathic abilities unmatched. Her voice could calm the wildest beasts and command armies without lifting a weapon. For centuries, the greatest rulers had fought wars to win her affection. Empires had risen and fallen in the pursuit of her hand. But she had chosen no one. Now, a new competition had begun. The richest, most powerful beings in the universe were offering everything they had, planets, fleets, and unimaginable wealth, to claim her as their own. A voice echoed through the hall. It belonged to Lord Sendar, a warlord feared across the stars. His red armor glowed with power, and his eyes burned like fire. He stepped forward, his deep voice shaking the walls. "I offer 10 billion credits," he announced, "and the throne of my empire." Gasps filled the chamber. An entire empire, offered like a mere gift. A second voice interrupted. High Chancellor Orvos, ruler of the Galactic Council, raised a hand. His reptilian features remained calm, but his tone was firm. "I offer control over the entire Orion sector," he said, "and a fleet of warships unlike any the galaxy has seen." The bidding continued. Each offer was greater than the last. Entire star systems, endless power, eternal loyalty. Yet, through it all, Velzira remained silent. She stood still, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. Then, at last, she spoke. Her voice was soft, yet it carried across the room. "I choose none of you." A heavy silence fell over the hall. Some gasped. Others growled in frustration. Lord Sendar's hand curled into a fist. "No," he repeated, his voice low with disbelief. "We offer you the greatest treasures in existence, and you refuse." Velzira turned her head slightly. "I was never yours to claim." Anger flashed in the warlord's eyes. Others murmured, whispering to one another. No one had ever denied them like this before. Then someone laughed. It was a deep, casual laugh, full of amusement rather than arrogance. The sound came from the back of the chamber, where a single man leaned against the wall. A human. Commander Jack Rowe stood with his arms crossed, a smirk on his face. He was different from the rest. He wore no royal robes, no golden armor. His simple jacket was worn, his boots scuffed from too many battles. His brown hair was messy, his face unshaven. He had no empire, no fortune, no throne. And yet, Velzira's violet eyes softened ever so slightly when they landed on him. Lord Sendar turned to face him, his anger shifting to confusion. "Who are you?" he demanded. Jack shrugged. "Just a guy who finds this whole thing ridiculous." The warlord's eyes narrowed. "You dare mock us." Jack pushed off the wall and took a slow step forward. "You're all acting like she's some kind of prize, a trophy to be bought. Maybe that's why she doesn't want any of you." Whispers spread through the room. Velzira tilted her head slightly. "And what do you think, Jack Rowe?" Jack glanced at her and smirked again. "I think if you wanted to be with any of these guys, you would have already picked one." For the first time in centuries, Velzira smiled. The warlords and diplomats did not. Lord Sendar's expression darkened. "You think a simple human like you can challenge us?" His fingers twitched, and the air grew heavy. Soldiers shifted in place, weapons ready. Jack rolled his shoulders. "Nope. But I think you all just realized something, didn't you?" He gestured toward Velzira. "She's not picking you. And that burns more than any weapon ever could." Silence. Then, Velzira took a step forward. "I have made my decision," she said clearly. "You may fight over me for eternity, but my heart has already chosen." Her gaze locked onto Jack. And in that moment, the galaxy shifted. The warlords, kings, and rulers of the universe had lost. Not to each other, not to war, but to one single human. Jack scratched the back of his head. Well, guess that settles it. It did not. Because the most powerful beings in the galaxy were not going to accept defeat so easily. And if Jack Rowe thought he could simply walk away with the most desired woman in the universe, he was about to learn a painful truth. The galaxy never let go of something it wanted. And now, every warlord, assassin, and ruler in the universe had just one target. Him. The human who refused to bow. The first attempt on Jack Rowe's life happened less than an hour after Velzira made her choice. It came fast, silent, and without mercy. As Jack walked through the grand corridors of the Imperial Star Hall, his mind still replaying the scene from the auction, something shifted in the air behind him. A whisper of movement, too fast for most species to detect. But Jack wasn't most species. His instincts screamed, and without thinking, he ducked. A razor-thin blade slashed through the space where his throat had been just a second ago. Jack twisted, his training kicking in, and caught a glimpse of his attacker, a sleek, armored figure, the signature dark blue plating of a Zenfar assassin. "Really?" Jack muttered, rolling to the side as another blade came slicing toward him. The assassin was fast, almost impossibly so. But Jack had spent years in battlefields across the stars. His body moved before his mind did, muscle memory guiding his actions. He grabbed the assassin's wrist mid-strike, twisted it sharply, and drove his elbow into their ribs. The assassin staggered, shocked by the strength of the human. But before Jack could capitalize, the attacker activated a personal cloaking field, vanishing from sight. Jack exhaled sharply. Coward. Then he heard the guards rushing toward him. A squad of Tavarian enforcers stormed into the hall, their golden armor gleaming under the artificial lights. Their leader, a broad-shouldered alien with dark crimson skin, stepped forward. His yellow eyes glowed with suspicion. "Commander Rowe," the enforcer said, voice thick with authority. "You are under arrest for attacking a foreign dignitary." Jack wiped the sweat from his brow and laughed. "Oh, that's how we're playing this. You all saw the assassin, right?" The guards didn't even hesitate. Their weapons snapped into position, aimed straight at him. Of course. Jack shook his head. This wasn't about justice. It was about power. The ruling elites of the galaxy had just been humiliated in front of their rivals. They wouldn't take this loss gracefully. They had no interest in fairness. They just wanted him gone. He raised his hands, smirking. All right. I surrender." But as the guards moved in, Velzira's voice echoed through the hall. "Release him." Silence fell instantly. Velzira stood at the far end of the corridor, her presence alone enough to freeze everyone in place. The enforcers hesitated, shifting uncomfortably as she approached. "This man is under my protection," she said, her voice calm, yet undeniable. The lead enforcer's jaw clenched. "My lady, the High Lords demand." "I do not answer to the High Lords," Velzira interrupted, her violet eyes flashing. "And neither does he." Jack let out a low whistle. Damn, she was good. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. No one wanted to challenge the most desired and respected woman in the galaxy. Not openly. Finally, the enforcers stepped back. Jack rolled his shoulders. "That's what I thought." Velzira gave him an unreadable look. "Come with me." He did. The price of defiance. Jack followed Velzira into a secluded chamber aboard the Imperial Star Hall. The room was decorated in elegant flowing designs, the kind of high-class aesthetics that screamed royal to anyone who stepped inside. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You should leave," she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "You serious?" "I just got here." Valzyra's fingers curled slightly at her sides. You don't understand what you've done. Every ruler, warlord, and highborn noble in the galaxy is now your enemy. The fact that I chose you, it is an insult to them. Jack leaned against the nearest wall, arms crossed. Yeah, I figured that out when they sent a knife to my throat. Her eyes darkened. They will not stop. Jack let out a slow breath. He had spent most of his life on battlefields, fighting wars that weren't his, bleeding for causes he didn't believe in. Now he was caught in another fight, but this time it was personal. He studied Valzyra carefully. For all her power, all her grace, there was something else in her gaze, something no warlord or ruler had ever seen before. Fear, not fear for herself. Fear for him. Jack grinned. Let me guess. You expected me to run. Valzyra hesitated. It would be the logical choice. Yeah, well. He pushed off the wall and stretched. Never been much for logic. She exhaled, frustration flickering across her perfect features. You don't understand what you're up against. Jack's smile faded slightly. No, I do. I know exactly what's coming. He met her gaze, his voice steady. The difference is, I don't care. Valzyra blinked, caught off guard. Why? Jack's expression softened. Because for the first time in a long time, someone actually made a choice for themselves. And I'll be damned if I let these bastards take that away from you. Something shifted in the air between them. For centuries, Valzyra had been seen as a prize, a tool, a symbol of power. But Jack saw her as something else entirely, a person. For the first time in her life, Valzyra did not feel alone. And for the first time in his life, Jack had something worth fighting for. But as they stood in that quiet moment, they both knew the truth. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because now, the most powerful forces in the universe had a new target. And Jack Rowe was about to find out what it truly meant to stand against the galaxy. Assassins, betrayal, and a galactic bounty. The first bounty was placed before Jack even left the Imperial Starhall. It was a simple message, transmitted across the galactic underworld, reaching every mercenary, assassin, and bounty hunter from the core worlds to the lawless outer rim. Tar GT, Jack Rowe. Reward, 100 million Sur EDTS. Dead or alive. For most killers, it wasn't even a question. One human? Easy money. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. The first wave. Jack had barely stepped onto the spaceport deck when the first sniper drone locked onto him. Most people would have missed the sound, the faint, high-pitched whine of the charge coil powering up. Jack didn't. His body moved before his mind did. He dropped to the ground as the energy round burned through the air above him, barely missing his head. Damn, Jack muttered. Didn't even get my coffee yet. A second shot fired. Jack rolled to cover, his back pressing against a steel cargo crate as the sniper repositioned. Footsteps echoed across the deck. More were coming. They weren't wasting time. Jack exhaled sharply. He was a soldier, not some fancy telepathic warrior or a cybernetic killing machine. He had no energy shields, no psychic defenses, just his instincts, his training, and a gun that wasn't nearly big enough for this mess. The comlink in his ear crackled. Jack. Valzyra's voice was calm, but he could hear the tension beneath it. Yeah, I know. People want me dead. Jack peeked over the crate just in time to see 3 bounty hunters moving in. 2 humanoids in black armor, the third a 6-legged insectoid wielding a plasma spear. Valzyra's voice was softer now. We need to get you out of here. Jack grinned. Working on it. ***. He grabbed a discarded metal bar from the ground and hurled it toward the nearest fuel canister. The impact triggered a small explosion, sending flames roaring into the air. The bounty hunters hesitated. A mistake. Jack sprang forward, grabbed the closest one by the wrist, twisted the weapon out of their hand, and slammed an elbow into their jaw. The second raised their blaster. Jack yanked the first bounty hunter's body in the way, using them as a shield. The energy bolt struck their chest, and they collapsed. The insectoid warrior lunged, spear humming with energy. Jack sidestepped the thrust, grabbing the shaft of the weapon and yanking it sideways. The insectoid stumbled, and Jack drove his knee into its head. The alien crumpled. The sniper drone recalibrated. Jack felt the crosshairs lock onto him again. Then a pulse of violet energy crackled through the air. The drone sparked and exploded. Jack turned to see Val Zira standing at the entrance of a waiting starship, her hand still glowing with telepathic energy. Jack exhaled. "You know, I was handling it." Val Zira tilted her head. "You were taking too long." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fair enough." Then they both turned toward the sky, because suddenly hundreds of ships were converging on their location. And the bounty was just getting started. A price too high. The bounty didn't just attract mercenaries. It shook the entire galactic balance. Jack wasn't just some fugitive. He was now a symbol. A human had been chosen over kings, warlords, and emperors. And that insult ran deeper than any bullet wound. The High Lords of the Dominion convened in secret, discussing whether to launch a full-scale military operation to capture him. The syndicate lords of the underworld tripled the bounty, betting that his death would bring them favor with the ruling class. Even the Zenfar Dominion, the deadliest conquerors in the galaxy, took notice. Not because they cared about love, but because they had other plans for Val Zira. And Jack. Jack was still trying to find a place to sleep that didn't come with an assassination attempt. Nowhere left to run. "All right," Jack said, ducking as another explosion rocked their ship. "I think we've officially pissed off everyone." Val Zira sat in the co-pilot's chair, fingers moving across the controls. Her expression remained calm, but Jack could see the tension in her shoulders. "They will not stop," she said. "Not until you're dead." Jack sighed. "Yeah, I got that part." He leaned back, staring at the stars outside the cockpit window. It was funny, in a way. He had spent his whole life fighting wars that didn't matter, taking orders from people who saw him as nothing more than a tool. Now, for the first time, someone actually gave a damn about him. And the whole damn galaxy wanted him dead for it. Jack exhaled. "All right. So what's the plan?" Val Zira's eyes met his. "You still have time to walk away." Jack snorted. "You really think I'd do that?" A long silence stretched between them. Then, for the first time since this whole thing started, Val Zira's expression softened. "No," she admitted. "I don't." Jack smirked. "Good." Then he loaded his gun, cracked his knuckles, and grinned. "Because if the galaxy wants a fight, let's give them one. The empire that cannot be denied." The bounty had started as a challenge to mercenaries. Now it had become a war. Jack Rowe was no longer just a man on the run. He was an obstacle, an embarrassment to the rulers of the galaxy, a symbol of rebellion. And symbols had to be crushed before they inspired something worse. That was why the Zenfar Dominion was entering the hunt. They weren't like the warlords or the crime syndicates. They didn't care about pride, power, or political games. The Zenfar took what they wanted, and what they wanted was Val Zira. Her power wasn't just rare, it was unstoppable if properly controlled. Her telepathic abilities, if amplified, could turn armies into mindless slaves, their wills rewritten with a single thought. With her under their control, the Zenfar wouldn't just rule the galaxy. They would own it, and Jack Rowe was standing in their way. So they did what they did best. They declared war. The fall of Nova Haven. Jack had never heard of Nova Haven before arriving there. It was a small colony world, independent, neutral, the kind of place that didn't ask questions, exactly what he and Val Zira needed. They had been on the run for weeks. Every safe house had been burned, every contact they could trust either dead or too scared to help. They needed a place to regroup. Nova Haven was supposed to be that place. Then the Zenfar fleet arrived. Jack was in a local bar when the first shockwave hit. The ground trembled as the sky turned red, massive warships descending through the clouds like monsters from a nightmare. Then came the screaming. Jack didn't hesitate. He was out the door in seconds, his instincts already screaming at him to find Val Zura and get the hell off this rock. But the Zenfar had other plans. Nowhere left to hide. Jack sprinted through the burning streets, dodging panicked civilians and falling debris. The Zenfar shock troopers were already on the ground, their dark armor reflecting the flames of the city. They moved like predators, their silken black cloaks barely shifting as they cut down anyone in their path. This wasn't an invasion. It was a message, a demonstration of what happened to those who defied the Zenfar. Jack turned a corner and saw Val Zura. She stood in the center of the chaos, her violet eyes glowing as energy pulsed through the air around her. Dozens of civilians were behind her, terrified but unharmed. She was protecting them. Even now, when she could have fled, she was saving others. Jack cursed under his breath. You never make things easy, do you? A Zenfar commander stepped forward, eyes locking onto her. Jack recognized him immediately. General Krevos, the Butcher of Marath Prime. A being who had enslaved entire worlds, leaving nothing but obedient husks where civilizations once stood. Now he was here. For her. Krevos tilted his head, studying Val Zura with something that almost resembled admiration. You waste your power on these lesser creatures, he said, his voice smooth, calculated. But that will change soon. Val Zura didn't move. You will not take me. Krevos smiled. I already have. Jack pulled the trigger. The shot was perfect, straight to the head. A clean kill. Except the bullet never hit. Krevos didn't even blink as the round froze in midair, caught by an invisible force. Jack barely had time to react before his body was lifted off the ground. An invisible vice wrapped around his throat. Not physical, mental. A crushing force squeezed his lungs as he struggled against something he couldn't see. Krevos turned to him, still calm, still in complete control. You are insignificant, he said simply. A relic of a weaker species. Jack's vision blurred. His body fought, but it was useless. He had survived wars, assassins, entire fleets hunting him down. But this was different. This was power beyond anything he had ever faced. Then, suddenly, the pressure vanished. Jack dropped to the ground, coughing, gasping for air, because Val Zura had stepped forward, and her eyes were glowing brighter than ever before. The awakening. The ground shook beneath them. Krevos faltered, just for a moment, just enough for Jack to see something he never thought possible. Fear. Val Zura didn't speak. She didn't need to. The air itself trembled around her as an invisible force spread through the battlefield. The Zenfar troopers froze in place, their bodies stiff, their weapons slipping from their hands. One by one, they collapsed. Not dead, but completely disconnected from their own minds. Val Zura turned to Krevos, her voice like a whisper that carried through the flames. You are nothing. Krevos staggered, his telekinetic hold shattered. He took a step back, then another. Jack had never seen a Zenfar retreat, but he was watching it now. Krevos's expression twisted. This is not over. And then he was gone, vanishing in a flicker of dark energy, retreating to whatever hellish empire he had come from. Jack coughed again, struggling to his feet. His body ached, but he was still alive. Val Zura turned to him. Her eyes dimmed slightly, the glow fading. She looked exhausted. Jack exhaled. Okay, I'll admit it. He grinned. That was pretty badass. Val Zura didn't smile. They will return. Stronger. With more. Jack ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, that's kinda what worries me. Because now, the Zenfar weren't just hunting them. They were preparing for war. And Jack Rome knew one thing for sure. If they wanted Val Zura, they would have to go through him first. The impossible stand. The Zenfar never lost. For centuries, they had conquered planets without mercy, reduced civilizations to slaves, and rewritten history to erase those who stood against them. But today, in the ruins of Nova Haven, they had retreated. And that meant only one thing. They would be back. Stronger. With an unstoppable force. Jack Rose stood in the wreckage of the colony, looking up at the night sky. It was quiet now. Too quiet. The fires had burned low, the screams had faded, and the bodies had been taken away. The people of Nova Haven were safe. For now. But Jack knew the truth. This was just the beginning. No more running. Jack leaned against the charred remains of a building, rubbing his temples. His body ached from the fight, his bruises forming into a familiar pattern of pain. He had been through worse, but something about this was different. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. This time, it mattered. Velzira stood beside him, silent. She was drained from the battle, her telepathic power barely flickering in her eyes now. He could see the weight of it all pressing on her. "I can feel them," she murmured. Jack glanced at her. "The Zenfar." She nodded. "They're regrouping. They are angry." Jack snorted. "Yeah, no kidding." He reached for his sidearm, checking the charge. Only 4 shots left. He sighed. "All right. So what's the plan?" Velzira hesitated. "We leave," she said finally. "Find another place. Keep running." Jack was silent for a moment. Then he shook his head. "No." Velzira turned to him, confused. "No." Jack met her gaze. "I'm done running." She frowned. "Jack, you don't understand." "No, I do." He stepped forward, voice firm. "Every time we run, more people get caught in the crossfire. They don't want me. They want you. And they'll burn down every planet, every station, every city in the galaxy to get to you." Velzira's expression darkened. "That's why we can't stay here." Jack smirked. "You're missing the point." He turned, looking around the ruined city. The people were already rebuilding, setting up defenses, preparing for the next attack. They knew what was coming. And yet, they weren't running. Jack's smirk faded. "Let them come." Velzira's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." Jack crossed his arms. "I spent my whole damn life taking orders, following commands, fighting for people who didn't give a damn about me." He exhaled, shaking his head. "Not this time." He looked at her. "This time, I fight for something real." Velzira was quiet. She searched his face for doubt, for hesitation. She found none. Finally, she closed her eyes and sighed. "Then we need a plan." Preparing for war. Jack had fought against impossible odds before. But this was suicide. The Zenfar would return. Not with assassins, not with a small strike force. They would send an armada. And Jack was going to stop them with a handful of civilians, broken weapons, and a ruined colony. Perfect. He gathered the survivors, farmers, traders, engineers, and ex-soldiers who had seen too much but survived anyway. "We're not waiting for them," Jack said. "We fight them our way." Velzira stood beside him. "Which is?" Jack grinned. "Guerrilla warfare." They turned the ruins into a battlefield. Trap zones. Crumbling buildings were rigged with explosives to collapse on command. False signal generators. They used old tech to send out fake distress beacons, luring enemy patrols into deadly ambushes. Underground tunnels. The civilians dug beneath the colony, creating a network of hidden pathways for hit-and-run tactics. Jack trained them all. The ones who could fight, they became soldiers. The ones who couldn't, they became the lifeline. Medics, scouts, engineers. This wasn't just a last stand. This was a trap. And Jack Rowe was about to teach the Zenfar a lesson they'd never forget. The battle begins. 3 days later, the Zenfar fleet arrived. They came in force, 20 warships, thousands of troops, siege weapons that could reduce cities to dust. Kravos led the assault personally. Jack stood at the top of a ruined tower, watching as the warships descended like gods of war. The sky darkened. The ground shook. Hell had come for them. Jack took a deep breath. Then he smirked. Showtime. The human problem. The first wave landed. Zenfar shock troops stormed the streets. Then the traps triggered. Entire buildings collapsed in explosions, sending debris crashing down. Troops were crushed under the weight, their ranks thrown into chaos. Then came the snipers. Hidden in the ruins, Nova Haven's defenders picked off officers, cutting the enemy's command structure apart. Then, from the underground tunnels, the fighters struck. Jack led the charge. Blades, bullets, fire. He fought like a demon, moving through the battlefield with brutal precision. A single human against an empire. And somehow, he was winning. The Zenfar were strong. They were many. But Jack was relentless, a force of nature. And the Zenfar learned something they had never known before. Humans don't break. The turning point. As the battle raged, Kravos stepped onto the battlefield. He was done playing games. His telepathic power unleashed, crushing minds, snapping bones, turning men into screaming husks. Jack barely had time to react before he felt the same invisible force wrap around his throat. It was happening again. The same crushing power that had nearly killed him before. But this time, Velzura was ready. Her eyes flashed, and the sky exploded in violet energy. The entire battlefield froze. Zenfar warriors dropped their weapons, screaming. Kravos staggered, his body shaking violently. Velzura stepped forward. "No more," she whispered. With a single thought, she shattered every Zenfar mind within range. And then, it was over. The Zenfar fled. For the first time in history, they lost. And Jack Rose stood in the ashes, breathing hard. He had won. But he knew the truth. This wasn't victory. It was only the beginning. The moment that changed the galaxy. The battlefield was silent. Smoke curled into the sky, the air thick with the scent of fire and something else. Victory. Defeat. A shift in the universe that could not be undone. Jack Rose stood among the wreckage, his body aching, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His gun was empty, his fists were bloodied, and his mind was screaming at him to sit down before he collapsed. But he couldn't. Not yet. The Zenfar had fled. For the first time in their history, they had tasted something unfamiliar. Something terrifying. Defeat. And they would never forget it. The aftermath. The people of Nova Haven didn't cheer. Not yet. They had won, but they had also lost. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, friends, strangers. Bodies lay scattered across the streets, mingled with the broken forms of Zenfar warriors. The war machines of an empire lay in ruins, their once imposing forms now nothing but twisted metal and shattered dreams. Jack looked at the survivors, men and women who had never held a gun before this battle, now standing among the rubble, their eyes heavy with exhaustion and grief. They had fought. They had survived. But they all knew the truth. This wasn't over. Jack turned to Velzura. She stood a few feet away, her violet eyes dim, her usually flowing silver-blue hair now dull, streaked with dust and sweat. She looked tired. More than that, she looked scared. Jack exhaled, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "You okay?" Velzura didn't answer right away. She looked at the sky, at the clouds of warships still visible in orbit. Then, finally, she spoke. "I don't know." Jack frowned. He had never heard her say that before. "You saved us," he said. "Saved all of them." Velzura turned to him, something haunted in her gaze. "Did I?" Jack's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then whispered, I felt them. Jack tensed. Who? Velzura swallowed hard. The Zenfar. When I struck them, I touched their minds. I saw what's coming. Jack's blood ran cold. And Velzura took a shaky breath. They're not done. They're just beginning. The true enemy. Jack had faced impossible odds before. But this was worse. Velzira's voice was barely above a whisper. The Zenfar didn't just retreat out of fear. She turned to Jack, her violet eyes burning with terrifying knowledge. They called for help. Jack's heartbeat slowed. What? Velzira nodded. I felt it. In the last moments, before they pulled back, they reached out. Jack clenched his fists. To who? Velzira's eyes darkened. To their masters. Silence. The words hit Jack harder than any battle had. Because if the Zenfar weren't the real threat, then what the hell was? The shadows that watch. It didn't take long for Jack to get his answer. 2 days after the battle, a new fleet arrived. They came without warning. No hailing frequencies. No threats. No dramatic speeches of vengeance. Just arrival. Massive, obsidian warships that seemed to swallow the light around them. The skies of Nova Haven turned black, as if the very stars had been erased. And then, the voices came. Jack wasn't the only one who heard them. Every single person in Nova Haven, every man, woman, and child, felt it at the same time. A whisper. 1,000 whispers. A voice older than time itself. It wasn't spoken. It wasn't heard. It was simply there. Inside their minds. You have interfered. Jack staggered. His skull felt like it was being crushed from the inside. Some of the civilians collapsed, screaming, clutching their heads. Others went silent, their eyes turning empty. Velzira clenched her jaw, sweat dripping from her brow as she resisted. Jack barely stayed on his feet. Yeah, he gasped, looking up at the ships. And the whisper did not waver. You were not meant to exist. Jack laughed, even as his vision blurred. Yeah, well, tough luck. You have broken the cycle. Jack's grin faded. He glanced at Velzira. She looked horrified. Jack frowned. What cycle? Velzira's breath hitched. She knew. Jack saw it in her eyes. And then the whisper said something that changed everything. You were never supposed to win. Jack's blood ran cold. He stared at the sky, at the ships, at the void itself. This wasn't about a war. This wasn't about a bounty. This was bigger. Something far older than the Zenfar had been controlling the galaxy from the shadows. And Jack Rowe had just thrown their entire plan into chaos. Jack clenched his fists. He wasn't the smartest guy in the universe, but he knew one thing for sure. He was really, really good at pissing people off. Jack exhaled, rolling his shoulders. All right, he muttered. New game, new rules. He turned to Velzira. How do we beat them? Velzira stared at him, her voice almost lost in the wind. I don't know if we can. Jack grinned. Yeah, people keep telling me that. He turned back to the sky, his smirk widening. And for the first time in history, the shadows hesitated. Because humans didn't follow the script. Every alien wants her, but she chose a human. Jack Rowe wasn't supposed to win. That was what the whispers had said. That was what the real enemy had revealed. But Jack Rowe had never been good at following orders, especially from things lurking in the shadows of the universe. So when the void itself told him that his victory was a mistake, that humans were never meant to change the cycle, Jack had only one response. Screw your cycle. The truth beneath the lies. Velzira had seen many things in her long life. She had walked through the halls of empires, seen the rise and fall of civilizations. She had been sought after by kings, by warlords, by those who thought possessing her would grant them power. But she had never seen this. Jack Rowe, a simple human, standing defiant in the face of something older than the stars themselves. The whispering voices did not waver. You misunderstand, human. This is not a war. This is correction. Jack snorted. Yeah? And what are you correcting? Your existence. Jack felt something shift. The sky above Nova Haven twisted, the black warships above them seeming to fracture reality itself. The Zenfar were still retreating, terrified, their masters now fully revealed. And then they stepped forward. Not ships, not soldiers, beings. Their forms were shifting, fluid, impossible to fully comprehend. Their faces were a lie, their voices whispers layered upon whispers. They had no name, no species, no origin. They were the ones before, and they had been controlling the galaxy from the beginning. Jack clenched his jaw. He had fought a lot of things. Mercenaries, warlords, assassins, even an empire. But this was something else. You're just like them, Jack muttered. Another group of power-hungry bastards who think they can control people. The whispers grew louder. We do not control. We guide. We erase mistakes. Jack laughed. Velzira turned to him, her voice urgent. Jack. No, let them finish, Jack said, still grinning. I want to hear how my entire species was a cosmic typo. Silence. Then the whispers spoke again. Humanity was never part of the design. Jack's smirk faded. Velzira stiffened. What do you mean? The whispers spread, wrapping around the air itself. Before, there was balance. Species rose, species fell. But then, humans came, chaotic, unpredictable, resistant. Jack raised an eyebrow. Resistant. To control. Velzira's breath hitched. They couldn't influence you. Jack blinked. Then he grinned. That's what this is about, huh? You've been pulling strings forever, but humans, we don't listen. The whispers shifted, uncertain. Jack stepped forward. We don't break. We don't bow. We don't do what we're told just because some big scary voices in the dark say so. Velzira realized it then. The ones before weren't omnipotent. They weren't invincible. They were afraid. Afraid of humans. Afraid of Jack. Because he had done the one thing they never expected. He had won. The final stand. The air shuddered. The whispers turned to roars. The ones before lashed out. Reality ripped apart as pure energy surged toward Jack, waves of power meant to unmake him, to erase his very existence from time. Jack moved. Not away. Forward. He charged straight into the impossible. The ground cracked beneath his feet. His bones screamed. The weight of 1,000 erased civilizations pressed down on him. And yet, he did not stop. Velzira screamed, reaching out, but she couldn't stop him. Jack Rowe was already gone. And then, he struck. His fist, a mere human fist, connected with the impossible. And the universe itself shattered. The whispers stopped. The black ships faltered. The ones before reeled back, their forms flickering, distorting. They had never been challenged before, never been touched. But now, they had been hit. By a human. By Jack Rowe. The ones before began to unravel. They weren't gods. They weren't invincible. They were just old. And humans were something new. Something they couldn't control. And so, for the first time in untold millennia, the ones before ran. Their whispers faded, their warships vanished, their presence erased, and the sky cleared. For the first time in history, the galaxy was truly free. The choice that mattered. Jack staggered. He barely felt it when Velzira caught him, her arms wrapping around him as he collapsed to his knees. His whole body was burning, his mind barely holding together. Velzira pressed a hand to his face, searching his eyes. Jack, stay with me. He exhaled. Did we win? Valzyra's lips parted, then curved into a smile. "Yes," she whispered. Jack grinned. "Told you." She let out a shaky laugh, pressing her forehead to his. "Idiot." Jack chuckled. "Yeah, well, you picked me." Valzyra pulled back slightly. Her eyes softened, the weight of the entire galaxy melting away. "I did." Jack's smirk faded slightly. "Why?" Valzyra reached up, cupping his face gently. "Because," she murmured, "out of all the beings in this universe, all the rulers, the warriors, the conquerors, you were the only one who never wanted to own me." Jack's breath hitched. Valzyra leaned in, her lips barely brushing against his. "I didn't choose you because you were the strongest." Her voice was soft. "I chose you because you were human." And then, as the galaxy watched, stunned, broken, forever changed, she kissed him. And Jack Rose smirked against her lips. "Guess they'll have to deal with it."